Thank you very much. So my talk today is about Bothism. Apologies, it's not in Finnish, but you don't want to hear my Finnish. It's essentially a plea for us all to end the false choice between long and short-term marketing tactics, because both short-termism and long-termism are really just what you might call wrong-termism, in my view. It's a plea for us to start to close the value-destroying divide between brand and performance marketing. Jellyfish, where I'm from, started out as a performance agency. Now it's a full funnel brand building and performance marketing agency. So we try and do both. So Bothism is what I'm talking about today. So Mark Ritson talked about, well, he actually coined the term Bothism a couple of years ago, or nearly did. And that was partly as a result of an article I'd written called The Wrong and the Short of It. Ritson shared it on LinkedIn, asked other marketers to read it, and one marketer called David Thomas pointed out on LinkedIn that maybe this article and Ritson's commentary on it and promotion of it would become known as the Bothism model. In the article, I talked about how long-term versus short-term is probably the most commonly cited false dichotomy in marketing, and that's saying something. Because we love false dichotomies in this industry. We love talking about or, we love talking about versus. Brand versus performance, emotional versus rational, creativity versus technology, intuition versus data, art versus science, to name just a few that we constantly debate. And of course, the answer to almost all of these is not versus or, it's and. It's certainly not versus or. This is because of our binary belief systems, the organizational silos we inhabit, the different kinds of agencies we work for, the different kinds of brands we have, the different job titles we have, the different metrics we tend to try and use and optimize. Now, it might seem a little bit unnecessary for yet more to be said about the long and the short term in marketing, given two industry legends who you've already heard about today have literally written the book on it, the long and the short of it. In fact, there's some kind of marketing law that any presentation about the long and the short has to have these two charts on the right by Binet and Field. So there they are on the screen there, those two absolute classics that if you're in this game, you've probably seen a million times before. If you had to distill down that book's huge and fundamental contribution to advertising into one line, it would be about how it defined the two core ways that advertising works and the two timescales it does it on: short-term sales activation and longer-term brand building. It's a book that argues for both and for balance, but somehow we still find ourselves in these arguments about whether to do things short or long-term. It's even quite possible for people to overlook the central importance of the theme of balance in that book. And in fact, the most important word in the title of the book is there in the middle. It's and. You even see Les and Peter described as the high priests of the long term, which is not what they are. But whilst the theory says we should all try to achieve a balanced approach in order to maximize both salability and sales simultaneously, there's a massive gulf between the theory and the actual practice, which is increasingly divided between practitioners of brand and performance marketing. This is a great chart from Les that didn't make it to their book and was actually a forerunner of his and Peter Field's famous zigzag chart. It shows how the long and the short are always happening simultaneously to some degree and in some kind of balance in the same execution. It shows two kinds of sales impacts from a single exposure to a single execution: a short-term sales spike and a longer-term tail. The two lines are interrelated. If you try to push the red spike higher in a given execution, you'll reduce the length of the black tail. To achieve equilibrium, you'll need a balance across a campaign and across your entire marketing plan. Les Binet doesn't believe, actually, that you should go for double duty, or what he calls double duty executions, where you try and do the same thing or do both things in one execution. He'd prefer a split plan with different kinds of executions doing different kinds of things. I believe it's increasingly possible to try and achieve that, actually. As Peter Drucker said, long-term results cannot be achieved by piling short-term results on short-term results. It's more complicated than being additive. It's a multiplicative, compound effect which starts slowly and strengthens over time like a snowball. And whilst all long-term growth actually has its roots in the short term, only some kinds of short-term activity also lead to long-term results. Short-term growth sometimes leads to long-term growth. Long-term growth always needs the roots of short-term growth happening there in the present. And LinkedIn's great new rule of thumb, the 95-5 rule, also helps us understand why balancing both long and short are important. It's for B2B, which usually has longer buying cycles, but the principle will likely hold for any brand. You always have far fewer buyers in market right now than will be in the market in the future. In B2B, it's around 5% on average in market now and around 95% in the future. So you need to find ways of both speaking to immediate buyers and also future buyers. This is a view that works really well, I think, especially to speak to people in the finance community, to help them understand how spending money today can help drive sales tomorrow. It's very close in mindset to the great... Oh, hang on. I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. It's great, very close in mindset to the great definition of brand from a commercial perspective that anyone's ever made, which is Tim Ambler's, "A brand is an upstream reservoir of future cash flow." And this is a related horticultural metaphor loved by Mark Ritson about how you cultivate your brand. If your brand is a tree, you have to water the roots for it to grow fruit. Picking fruit without watering the tree is unsustainable. And another really simple metaphor that anyone can get, it's like an alley-oop in basketball. If brand activity is the pass, performance activity is the dunk. So that's the what of Bothism. Now a little bit on why. And specifically, why now? There's definitely a sense, I think, that despite the hard times we're facing and consumers are facing and the constraints on budgets that that's likely to mean, a greater understanding of the need for balance, I think, is emerging. We're seeing VCs and investors in startups and scale-ups and other types of businesses get fed up with unprofitable tech companies that have just been allowed to grow their user bases but not ever become profitable. The inflationary period we're in is putting more pressure on companies to put up prices, and so something that brand communication is actually brilliant at, but the performance activity has yet to be shown to be able to do, which is to support a price premium or even a price increase. It's now something marketers are having to think about again. Third, we're seeing many performance-driven brands really learning the hard way to get some balance into their plans. And fourth, and finally, something that's happening is more of a macro trend, I think, for a decade. Digital is now beginning to mature. Brand building is becoming more possible in digital channels. And the long-promised idea that you've already heard today on apparently the world's largest, or the Nordic's largest screen, TV is not dead, it's having babies. This really does seem to be happening now, particularly with the momentum that we're seeing behind connected TV. Kantar's Brand Z data shows that strong brands tend to outperform the S&P and other indexes and are more resilient in times of crisis and recover more quickly. And as we've seen, price has never been more salient a topic in marketing. Pricing power is one of Warren Buffett's favorite metrics, and this is one of my favorite quotes from him. And only brand building marketing really can have a real impact on this. The single most important decision in marketing, evaluating a business, is pricing power. If you've got the power to raise prices without losing business to a competitor, you've got a very good business. And if you have to have a prayer session before raising the price by 10%, then you've got a terrible business. So brand marketing, one of the few things that can actually help you achieve that. Performance marketing isn't going to touch the sides on that particular issue. And we've recently seen a couple of very major brands course correct, very major digital-first brands course correct, and move towards a more balanced approach to their split between brand and performance activity, having learned the hard way, those two being Airbnb and ASOS in the UK. We've seen some pretty major casualties. A couple there from the UK, Made.com and Eve, and there are many others. Digital brands that got the balance wrong and that found in the environment we're in, we just they weren't attuned to be able to support continuing to a brand that with organic sales that had demand, and their performance activity just wasn't able to achieve it for them. I'm not saying these brands' demise totally was responsible for their approach to brand building, not at all. It just sharpens the mind about how you build sustainable brands built for the longer term and how that's going to increasingly be the priority. And post-recession, people certainly want to prioritize resilience, price, profitability, and Bothism will be part of the answer to that. So how to do it? Well, first, trying to achieve equilibrium and not be wrong-termist. Wrong-termists get it wrong in two different ways. Short-termists on the left restrict the long-term growth their marketing can achieve, and long-termists on the right restrict its short-term sales impact. You want to be in the middle, creating good levels of demand and good levels of conversion, a balance of salability and sales. Ritson talks about funnel juggling, funny phrase, but it's about the different ways you can of balancing your activity. You can either do long, then short, do long as well as short, which is lots of executions which are either short or long simultaneously, or doing communications where one execution does both. All can work, I believe. Channels-wise, we're seeing more and more evidence from econometric studies that digital channels can actually do both. It comes down to targeting and creative content. TV and search happens to be a great combination from this work from 2019, the profitability work with, I think it was Ubiquity and ThinkBox and others. Classic combination. You're sat on your sofa watching a big screen. You're able to search very easily. Just a brilliant example of digital and more traditional channels working in harmony. Meta's long-term MMM study by NEPA shows, and this was, I think, a set of 6 retail and telco brands in the Nordics, that a variety of digital channels can deliver both short and long-term growth, so could be part of a balanced plan. So online video, perhaps unsurprisingly, Meta in this study came out really well, but TV came out really well as well. So I think we are seeing a kind of maturing in digital and an increasing possibility that we can balance plans across things. We don't need to be thinking TV, traditional brand building, digital, performance only. It's a much more blended approach we need to take these days. And I thought I'd share a case study by Gusto, which is a UK meal kit subscription brand. They found that they were spending far too much, 100% of their ad budgets on performance activity. Essentially, if they stopped advertising, their sales would stop. And if your sales stop when you stop advertising, you're probably doing it wrong, I'd argue. So what they did was to switch from 100% paid performance ads, which were driving 80% of their customer acquisition, and they switched to 60% brand, 40% performance. That is, of course, the kind of classic rule of thumb that Burnett and Field argue for. Although, according to Gusto, it was a coincidence that they got there iteratively through their own data to this 60-40 blend. After 3 years, they'd shifted their balance to 75% of their sales coming from organic or base sales and 25% from paid ads. So a much more balanced approach where brand activity had built their base sales and were achieving organic sales for them. So they were less reliant on paid advertising to acquire new customers. And this is the simple performance model they built to persuade their CFO and their C-suite how it was all going to work. Brand building was going to grow a pool, a reservoir of future customers that their paid ads would help convert. A really nice, simple model. So often in more performance-driven companies, they don't have the history and the philosophy of brand building. So they need a lot of help unthinking, unlearning what they believe about performance, and they need to understand the benefits of brand. And in this case, it was a very successful example of just simple communication internally in an organization to rethink its own marketing philosophy. So now a couple of thoughts on the impact of all this. This from Les Burnett is a real-world example, a real-world version of his and Peter Field's steps or zigzag chart happening. For this brand, the yellow tail was 60% of the sales, the red spikes, 40%. This kind of analysis is derived from MMM. econometrics so important, I believe, as a tool in the measurement toolkit. If anybody doesn't have that, I think brands is such an essential part of the mix when it comes to measurement. And here's a chart by econometrician Grace Kite and me. We were building on Les and Peter's classic steps chart from the perspective of a digital-first brand whose initial strong growth from always-on performance activity had leveled off. It had reached a kind of performance plateau. We're calling this, the performance plateau. So after which point the brand building activity was layered in. I think it could be TV, it could be a range of things. Often it is TV, though. It's been successfully deployed, and you can see the sort of triple whammy effect of helping take growth to the next level, the long and short-term effects of that brand building activity itself, and then the impact on performance activity, which can often be to enhance and optimize that existing always-on activity. So it shows the impact of a successful decision to layer in brand building, and it has that kind of cumulative effect over time. And this chart from Grace Kite alone is a real-world example of a brand that got stuck on the performance plateau and then solved its problem. In this case, it was with TV. So it is genuinely a real kind of phenomenon that seems to happen, particularly to performance brands. And when we shared this ramp and bump chart amongst brands, often people say, yeah, we've suffered from that, we've seen that happen. And it's a real kind of a symptom of the digital age, I think. I also wanted to touch on the problems with focusing too much or over-optimizing ROI, and also with its evil digital twin ROAS, that if you're working on digital brands, you often have to contend with this new kind of metric called ROAS. The big issue with deciding to optimize ROI or ROAS is if you take it literally, the easiest way to do it, to optimize it, is to spend less, and that will improve ROI. So it's a dangerous game if you're obsessed with ROI. So as Byron Sharp says, ROI can send you broke. You have to maximize incremental total profit, not ROI, if you actually want to grow. And a big problem with focusing too much on ROAS, which is often the metric within the digital platforms that digital marketers are optimizing to, is that it gives too much credit to the players in the final third of the pitch. It can end up telling you that your strikers are doing everything, and actually what you need to do is put 10 strikers on the field. And the danger with that is it can lead to limiting the supply that your defense would normally and your midfield would normally give your forwards, and your supply begins to dwindle and your goals begin to dwindle ultimately. So it's just one of the unintended consequences that focusing too much on ROAS can have. And getting to the end now, but just wanted to touch briefly on some of the issues we've seen with the ubiquitous sales funnel. Essentially, it wasn't really built with any of the marketing science we have today about how brands grow. So the awareness, consideration, conversion funnel, which you see everywhere, just isn't actually how things work or how brands grow. Awareness is too blunt. You need much more than that. You need mental availability. Consideration isn't always necessary. Many brands are bought on a very emotional level. You don't need to strongly consider them or think rationally to compare different brands. And conversion puts far too strong a word on things. Actually, advertising is a very weak force, so to convert people isn't what it's really doing. So here's a new version of that we use at Jellyfish, which is much more kind of taking into account the way that brands really grow and mental availability, so building mental availability in people's minds, nudging and reminding people of the things, the associations they have with your brands, and then connecting people if they've already decided to purchase your brand, helping them navigate towards your brand, make it easier to buy. So essentially, easy to mind, easy to find, which is that classic Byron Sharp kind of dualism. And now a short commercial break for a SaaS product we're beginning to look at Jellyfish, which is our share of demand dashboard. You've probably heard about share of search. We're really into it at Jellyfish. We've got this thing which looks at your share of search within a category, and also it looks at share of traffic. And it's got a kind of built-in news tracker, so you can actually spot where your share of search is coming from, what's happening in the environment in your category. And it really helps you keep tabs on what's going on in your category, and keep tabs on the kind of long-term decline that you can see in your share of search, or improvement if your share of voice is doing well. So hopefully it's clear from all this that a marketing effectiveness culture that favours balance is both Bothist in nature and eats a performance culture for breakfast. And I just wanted to give Mark Ritson the final word. I don't know if you've had a play with ChatGPT or any generative AI tools yet, but if you ask ChatGPT to write in the style of Ritson a couple of lines on Bothism, this is what it writes. Brands need to stop being fucking one-sided and start being bothist. That means doing both fucking brand building and performance activity. Don't be a fucking moron, get with the program and start being bothist. Hashtag marketing, hashtag branding. That's what ChatGPT believes Ritson's all about. So thanks very much.